Good morning, team. How goes it? Nadia and I are living on the edge today. We're down in the round pen again. I'm going to go for a ride with her shortly. And just prior to coming down, this huge cloud came over and it started raining, and I had to make a calculated decision about whether this was the best thing to do outside. But it seems like the sun is shining on us again and we are back on track, so that's awesome. What are you all up to? I know some of you will be finishing the day if you're in the northern hemisphere, and those of you on the same side of the world as me will be just kicking off. Good morning, Nan. Today's topic, when I ran through the listed topics that I'd kind of outlined, was to do with discussing the 4 intelligences that I've been going on about over the last few days. Hey Dale, hi Cindy. Wow, rain up there, snow in Montana. Yes, it's that time of year for you, huh? Looks gorgeous though, although I know it might not be all that practical. So we were going to talk about the 4 intelligences. And I've switched topics because I think we've covered that in quite a lot of detail over the last few days. And so just to recap, basically my stream of thought, or the direction that a lot of the new content that I've been producing for my membership, and just generally how I'm taking things when it comes to mental skills training is and mindset training, is really making sure that we're paying attention to the whole of us, that we're moving into a wholehearted practice with ourselves and with our horses. And that involves paying attention not only to the logical or intellectual side of us, but also to the emotional, to the intuitive, and to the physical. And when we get stuck in only one realm of working and we overdevelop that particular area, then it obviously limits us in so many ways, because we really need to be talked about as if it's less reliable, as if it's less trustworthy. And so what I really want to develop, I guess, and kind of go into myself, is ways where we can start to really access that emotional intelligence and not suppress it or overexpress it, which is often the case when we are trying to be something that we're not, when we're trying to present a facade of calm or of relaxation, when actually what we're feeling is anxious or upset, or we haven't got ourselves into a position where we're able to process those emotions effectively. Obviously, the importance of this is so much, there's so many reasons as to why these are important skills to get a handle on, because when we present to our horses in a way that is out of alignment, and what I mean by that is when we are working hard to produce a facade that is out of alignment with how it is we're actually feeling, they know well ahead of schedule. They know sometimes before we realize ourselves that we're kind of murky energetically, and that causes us to be untrustworthy. It causes us to be they really want to feel safe. That is the first and foremost prerequisite of any horse, to be able to feel safe. And safety comes with honesty. Safety comes with reliability. Interestingly, when I was last year when I was in Sydney doing my doing the in-house portion of the equine assisted learning certification, we had a little boy. Good morning, Jill. We had a little boy as part of one of the groups that came. And he went through the process with his horse, went through one of the exercises with his horse. And at the end, we finish off with a debrief. And as part of that, they choose a word off the whiteboard that really signifies or sums up for them what their primary learning was, I guess, and what their feeling was at the end of it. And he chose safety. And what he said I found really enlightening. And I have written about this, but for those of you who haven't read that particular post, I said, what made you feel safe about it? And he said, well, when I was out there with my horses, I knew that the feedback that they were giving me was 100% honest. And when I can rely on someone or something being honest, it makes me feel safe. And it was such a light bulb moment for me, because I was like, wow, that is so true. You know, when you're with someone, or maybe you're at work, or there's someone that you know that runs kind of hot and cold, you know, you're never quite sure where you stand with them. And on one particular day, they might be one way, and on another particular day, they're another way. And it makes you feel really uneasy, huh? Like when you can't trust someone's reliability in terms of their responses and how it is they kind of interact with the world, it really does create a feeling like you need to be on alert, like you need to be really looking out for yourself. And if you can think of that and put that into a different context of us being out there with our horses, when we're feeling one way and we're presenting in a different way, that same need for self-protection, I believe, comes up in them, because they're like, you're off. Like, we don't quite know what it is you really mean, because we can tell that the way that you are feeling and everything that you're emanating is really different from the projection or from what it is that you're asking. And so that creates a feeling of uneasiness that all of us are familiar with because of that same example that I just gave you. Many of us will, all of us, I think, will have been in that situation. And so I've changed tack in terms of a lot of you hear a lot of talk of fake it till you make it, right? And this is something that is taught. It has scientific basis as well, so I'm not discounting this. But what I want you to entertain is the idea of faking it till you make it is, again, this kind of projection into a future space where you're going to be accomplished when you can actually be something. And so that creates, again, a distance between us and this future desired point. What I instead want to think of is, it's not fake it till you make it. It's like, what is it that I need to practice now? And how is it that I can practice the smallest version of that so I'm able to embody that in the moment? So it's not fake. It's not a facade. It's an embodiment. It's like, if I was to want to practice confidence, if I was to practice relaxation, if I was to practice calm, what would that look like and what would that require of me? So it's not a layer that you're adding on to something that is in opposition to that. It's actually coming from an internal place where you're like, how can I reconcile all of the feelings that might be different to what it is that I actually want to project, and then step into the practice of becoming the thing that I'm wanting to actually activate within me. So if I'm wanting to activate calm, I may first have to recognize that calm is not something that I'm feeling, that anxiety is something that I'm feeling, or fear is something that I'm feeling. And these examples are obviously the more extreme examples. And what I mean by extreme is they're very common, but they obviously exist at one end of the spectrum. And there's variables of those that exist all the way down the line. So getting yourself into a place where you can first be mindful of how it is you're feeling, really recognize how it is that you're feeling without judgment. So instead of saying, gosh, I feel a bit anxious, and how stupid of me, this is ridiculous, I'm never going to make it, that whole narrative that we attach to feeling, instead saying, I feel anxious, that's really interesting. So you develop a degree of curiosity around that. And then you can say, well, what does that mean? Like, what specifically is it that I am anxious about? And what do I need to do with that information? Is that information valid? Quite oftentimes the information is valid. If you are in a situation where your skill set doesn't match the challenge that you're facing, then your anxiety is a really useful warning signal that's telling you, we need to get prepared for what's coming, we need to upskill, we need to talk to someone, or we need to pare it back to a point where we're able to manage it and see it through to a positive resolution for both ourselves and our horses. So getting in there and barreling through and saying, I don't feel anxious, let's just man up and do this, is actually really to the detriment of yourself and your horse. So the title that I put on today's video was, do you have a practice? Do you have something which allows for an emotional transition between what it is that you are wanting to create and how it is that you presently are. And I'm just out here with Nadia, I'm sitting quite high. I don't know, I'm sitting right up on this little post on the edge of the round pen, which I thought could go either way. You'll either see me topple off in a moment of non-concentration, or it'll work to my benefit. So what I would do with her is kind of just be really observant in the first instance of how it is that she's feeling and what it is that she's telling me and projecting to me. And instead of ignoring that or overlooking it, just being like, okay, well, that's interesting. That's what it is that we're dealing with this morning. This is the alchemy that we're dealing with. And that alchemy or that fusion comes with what her emotional presentation is and what my emotional presentation is. Now, there's nothing wrong with either of those. So in some instances, good morning, Susan. In some instances, you will be in a better, in inverted commas, place than your horse. And in some instances, it will be the reverse. So that the aim is ultimately to get yourself to the space where you're meeting in the middle. You're in that place where everything is lining up, and that's where you really start the beautiful process of not only riding, but kind of everything happening on a molecular level, where the most subtle version of what's possible becomes becomes how it is you're operating. So when it comes to thinking about a transition, the transitions itself from something which is very manual to something which is actually much more mindful based. So it's like you're thinking about the transition, and that thought is enough to kind of activate what is needed in order to bring that to life. So that's the end point, or the ultimate point that we're heading towards. Part of this discussion comes off the back of in Joyride, my membership program. I've made a whole course on this, and it's called the Aware Pathway, because I think that is really what we're ultimately moving towards or needing. We're really wanting to become aware of how it is that we're feeling, and so get ourselves to a place where we're not suppressing that, or we're not using that against our horses or against ourselves or other people, but just recognizing it and being able to set ourselves up so that we're grounded, so that we have a really good awareness of how it is that we are moving and operating, and what it is that we're asking of our horses. Because clarity is really so important. When you're not emotionally aware, and when you're not really clear on what it is that you're trying to create and produce, the waters are so muddy, and so you get a muddy response. If you ask a muddy or an unclear question, you get an unclear answer. And quite often, instead of looking to ourselves to say, well, what is it that I can clear up about this? Or what is it that I need to do in order for this to come to a better or more successful conclusion in terms of what it is I'm trying to create? We blame our horses for not getting it, for not really understanding. And I think this is where the cycle of frustration and even annoyance can arise, just basically because we've set up a platform of miscommunication that comes as a result of our inability to be clear. So do you guys have a process that sets you up? The one that I've come into is, and obviously because we're dealing with energy and emotions, it's in a very intuitive and image-based process. It's something that you have to actually let yourself embody, because this isn't something that is traditionally taught. It's not something that we learn at school. It's not like a process where you're like, actually, I'm going to tap myself on the leg 3 times and that's going to get rid of that emotion. It's an intention-based process that works in with imagery and visualization and also intuition. And that's really how we get to that space. Oh, we're a bit windy. Hopefully I won't get toppled off my perch. So grounding is really the first part of that, recognizing that there is a tendency when we get very heady, or when we get, can you hear me? When we get into emotions that have a high energy, we need to ground ourselves so that we're starting with an anchor point, and sloughing off those excess emotions which might be causing us to feel fractious in some way, or to really be above ourselves. And that grounding process is really important, and it's something that you can do prior to working together. So I'll start with some groundwork today, and then when I get on, if I feel the need to go through that process, I can do that in the saddle and on the ground. But even prior to working together, just creating space and giving yourself like a minute to run through a series of different things to get yourself grounded, and then just to recognize how it is that you're feeling. So there's a couple of breath techniques that I use that really allow us to recognize where emotion is sitting in our body. So anxiety, for instance, or let's cycle it back a little bit. When you're feeling calm and when you're feeling relaxed and everything is in sync, your seat of balance and your seat of your breath sits about 4 fingers below your belly button, so 4 fingers that way. And that's really the base of, that's our center. And when we come off center, you can recognize that the emotion sits in a different place. So if you're feeling anxious or you're feeling upset or afraid, and you took the time to check in as to where that was sitting in your body, generally it might be in your chest or in your solar plexus, but there's a place in your torso where you feel that emotion sit. And the beauty of recognizing that feeling is that you start to take something which is essentially intangible, like an emotional experience, and you can give it a physical quality. You understand that there is a position that it sits in your body. And when you do that, then you can use the breath techniques that I teach to really get yourself back in alignment, to say, okay, I recognize that. I'm going to attach a visual to that very intangible medium that I'm working with right now, which is emotion. And then we're going to get ourselves into a place where we are taking it down a few clogs and resting back in that central place. So it's not a suppression, it's a moving with and an allowing of processing, really, to get yourself into that different space. When I've been working recently, I've had a couple of riders that I've worked with that have had really severe anxiety issues as a result of previous injuries and accidents. And this setting up process, this emotional transition, is really key. It's such an important part, because I say when you go out there with your horse, now I don't want you to pretend that you're not feeling okay. I actually want you to sort of communicate that to yourself, and as ludicrous as it sounds, maybe even communicate it to your horse. So you take some time to actually maybe lead your horse around the arena and actually get out how you're feeling. So it might be, wow, I'm feeling a little bit upset. I know that we've totally got this. I'm just going to practice these grounding techniques as you're walking around the arena, so that you're taking yourself out of this kind of heady, high space and really feeling your feet on the ground and getting back to being really sensory focused. And then from there, there's a whole host of techniques that we introduce that to do with managing your focus, to do with really utilizing the breath. But essentially, again, taking something which feels very out there, which feels unquantifiable, which is emotion, and transferring it into something which is able to be manipulated, is not the right word, but I think it's probably the best one to give you a sense of what it is that I'm talking about. Manipulated in the sense of you start to, instead of feeling like you have an emotion coming at you, which is, you're at the mercy of, you are instead transforming it. And that is the emotional alchemy experience. That's you saying, I recognize this and I'm going to take this to a different place. I'm going to allow this to be processed and channeled and move through me. And I'm going to use some anchoring and grounding techniques to really, center myself where it is I need to be centered. And then from there are different processing techniques which we use, which is what the whole course is written around, to allow you to recognize what you need to from it and get yourself to that next point. With emotions, like the more that you suppress them, the louder the message becomes, because they're valid. Every feeling that you feel has validity. Everything you think is not necessarily true, but how you feel in the moment is real. And if you continually ignore that over time, it's like ignoring the warning light on your dashboard. When you get like that little light and you think, oh, it'll be okay, I'll keep driving, and then something else happens, you hear like a clunk sound in the car and you're like, oh, it's still going though, we'll be all right. And then you get to the point where actually you've just broken down in the middle of the road and it comes as a shock. But actually you've ignored a number of signals up until that point, which have the only option that they've been left with is to get louder and louder, to the point where you can no longer ignore them. It's the same with our emotions. You know, if you really ignore some of those subtle signals which happen at the start, those signals of warning lights on the dashboard, then your emotional expression has no option but to get louder. So that little hint of anxiety or that little hint of fear, that often starts with just the thought of what it is that you want to do. So for instance, if something you're doing with your horse is causing you anxiety or upset, chances are when you even think about that thing happening, you feel that same emotional response. That is your warning light on the dashboard. That is your chance to actually do something. And it's at this point that we really want to utilize and introduce all of the tools that we have. So when you get to the point where the environment is not so supportive of what it is that you want to create. And what I mean by that is if you're inside washing up and you have a thought about riding that causes you anxiety, that is a point of power, because you have the ability at that point to really change what it is you're thinking about, to change your focus, to really utilize some of the skills that I've just been discussing to get yourself back into a much more centered place and to recognize what you need to recognize from the emotion. If you continue to ignore it and then you leave it to the point where you actually have to get into the saddle, you can see how there's a variety of different pressurized elements which actually cause the emotional expression to feel so much greater. And at that point, that's where we've broken down in the middle of the road, because we've ignored all of these subtle signals or not so subtle signals in the lead up. And then we've got to this place where we feel completely immobilized or unable to do what it is that we want to do. Really, really important in both horse training and people training, that we don't ignore the holes at home. If you feel a little bit off kilter, then get yourself to a space at home when the environment is more supportive of what it is that you want to create before you step outside, before you go to the clinic, before you go to the lesson. Have a really incremental process to expand your emotional comfort zone so that you're able to, or you're better equipped really to deal with more pressure. And the same for your horse. You're not putting yourself in a position where it's really unfair for either of you. I think that's probably it today. I'm so interested to hear if you do have a process that you want to go through, or you do go through rather. And happy to answer any questions. I've been fascinated by it. I know that in conjunction with the process-based method that I've been doing, hi Naomi, yay, I'm so glad it's working out, and the aware pathway that I've made for my membership program, this has been a game changer for me, because it's real and it's truthful, and it doesn't require you to be anything that you aren't or feel like you can't be right now, because there's truth and validity and beauty to the emotions that you're feeling, and that's what we really want to work with. Where you are is the perfect place to start, as opposed to thinking, gosh, I need to be at this point to start. It's like you start where you are and you deal with what you have right now in front of you, and that's perfect, because there's no wrong feeling, there's no bad feeling or incorrect feeling for where it is that you are now. It's just a message that we need to take on board in order to get you to that next place. And I'll link down, if you're interested in checking it out, I'll put a link in the comments for Joyride, the membership, because I think I really believe in the value of it, which is why I keep banging on about it. I really think that this is something that we need to get on board with to really get the most joy out of what it is that we're doing. But I feel so strongly that we owe it to our horses to be able to present to them in a way that's really clear. Yeah, so I have my lovely horse in front of me who's actually just skewing her head on all sorts of different funny angles so that she can eat the grass through the palings. And we're going to jump on and have a ride around now, so I'm really excited about that. Actually, I've gone through the process myself, and I put a post up yesterday about not taking the time that I needed in the day to actually work with my own horses, and that being a degree of frustration. And I think it's really interesting because, and I don't want to generalise to women, but I think this is, maybe it's true for men as well. I suppose it's just my experience as a woman and a mum and a working mum, that you can really easily put your own stuff to the side. And for me, it's a completely no regret situation. Like last year was so busy on so many levels, and also, one of my horses got really, really ill, and he occupied a lot of my time, and then we had a few stop-starts for really valid reasons. And I've got to the stage this year where I thought, God, I don't want this year to be like last year in terms of the progress that I experienced with my horses. So it's interesting how you can get into that cycle of busyness. Like I feel like I kind of like zoom from one thing to the next, and I really like being productive and I love everything that I do. It's not a complaint at all, but my horse working seems to be something which I haven't prioritised as much as everything else, because it feels like, I guess, other people aren't reliant on me for that. So with the work that I do, I feel like I have a responsibility to other people to be there and to help, and that's something that I'm more than happy to do. And you know, similarly, many of you will feel that with work, and I think with family as well. Like, there are people that are reliant on you, that if you don't show up and follow through, then that has an impact on them. And when it comes to my horses, it's the thing that I do for myself and obviously hopefully for them, and so I found that because that accountability isn't there of expectation of someone else, it's really easy to have that bumped off the list just because there's so much fullness in the day. And so I'm not willing to kind of let that happen anymore, because it's that familiar saying of you can't pour from an empty cup, and for me this is really, and for all of us, I think it's the thing that fills me up and really brings me joy and kind of inspires so much in terms of conversation and learning and understanding about myself and other people. And so that's where I am now, kind of prioritizing that in the day, which I'm really looking forward to. So I'm going to jump on board shortly and we've beaten any kind of rain shower, so I'm going to call that a success. And have a lovely day anyway, or a lovely evening. Thanks so much for joining me. It's so fun to hang out and have these chats with you in the morning. I'll be back on again tomorrow, and this is on the Facebook page if you missed the start and you want to catch up with it, and I'll also upload it to YouTube after. All right, team, I'll catch you on the flip side. Bye.